Thank you for joining today's session on what's important for young people in the general election. I'm Laura Mistry, the Deputy Chief Executive at Youth Employment UK. I'm joined by our Director of Policy and Research, Rupal Patel, and Dr. Fiona Aldridge from the WMCA and Sharon Wheatman from the GMCA. In this session, we're going to be exploring early insights from Youth Employment UK's Youth Voice Census. Now in its 7th year, the census is an annual temperature check for how young people are feeling on a number of issues relating to who they are, where they live, and what they are experiencing. The information we are discussing has been taken from the data collection period from February this year to the 7th of June this year. The census captures data from 11 to 30-year-olds across the UK. The full 2024 Youth Voice Census report will be available in its entirety in September, but the discussion today will focus on what young people feel the big issues are for the country as a whole and within their local area. In terms of the data we're going to be talking about today, it's important to note that we are doing comparative analysis. This data set hasn't been weighted, particularly for the two regions we're going to talk about. The Youth Voice Census is our most important work at Youth Employment UK. As the full report becomes available, we'll be able to share much more detail on what it's like to be a young person aged 11 to 30 in 2024. But what we know today is that the employment rate for young people aged between 16 and 24 was 13.6%, 2.3 percentage points higher than the rate this time last year. This means that young people aged 16 to 24 are 3 times more likely to be unemployed than any other age group. The proportion of young people not in employment or full-time education has risen over the past year, and the number of young people who are not in full-time education or employment is over 1 million. We asked a series of questions in this year's Youth Voice Census data set to understand what the biggest issues are for young people, what might be holding them back, and what they're really enjoying. In terms of the data set, we asked all young people aged 11 to 30 what the biggest issues were for their country. They were allowed to select up to 3 issues, and there were 10 responses to choose from, including none and other. As we can see from the data set, as we're pulling it out here today, the economy was the top issue for all young people across the country. The other key issues are discrimination, leadership of the country, the environment, and crime and violence. 3 in 10 young people are concerned about the leadership of the country. We saw some differences across gender, race, ethnicity, and age, which are pertinent to talk about. So whilst male and female respondents agree that the economy is the biggest issue for them, for female respondents, discrimination is the second biggest factor, compared to our male respondents who thought that leadership was. For our non-binary and unsure questioning respondents, discrimination was their biggest issue for the country as a whole. When we consider race and ethnicity, the economy is the biggest issue for all groups except for those from mixed or multiple ethnic groups for whom discrimination was the biggest issue. And for Black, African, Black, British or Caribbean respondents, healthcare showed up as one of their biggest issues, where it wasn't as much as a factor for other race and ethnic groups. There isn't an age group from 11 to 30 for which discrimination does not feature within the top 5. In fact, from up until the age of 19, it is within their top 2 issues alongside crime and violence. From 14 onwards, we see the economy and leadership of the country overtaking as some of the larger issues that those young people are facing. From 19 onwards, we see healthcare start to come into the top 5, and from age 23 onwards, it is the top or the second biggest issues that those young people are talking about. We see from 23 onwards that the environment becomes one of the biggest issues overall for young people. We moved on next to ask young people what the biggest issues are within their local area. Again, they could choose up to 3 issues, and we gave them up to 10 options, including those none and other options we talked about earlier. The top 2 issues were the same for all respondents and regions: crime and violence and safety. Environmental issues appear as a key issue across all audiences, and over 1 in 5 reporting as a concern that they were worried about jobs and funding within their local area too. Male and female respondents rated crime and violence as the biggest issue for them. For young men, overall funding was their second biggest factor, and safety was the second biggest factor for young women. From a race and ethnicity perspective, For white, Asian, and mixed multiple ethnic groups, crime and violence was their top concern. For our Black, African, Black British, or Caribbean respondents, jobs was the biggest local issue they were facing. White respondents were most likely to vote healthcare as their big issue, rating it third overall, where it didn't place for all ethnicities in any position. From an age perspective, for all those young people aged 16 and under, safety was the biggest issue. Jobs becomes a key factor from 16 onwards, and from 18 onwards, it was the top issue up until young people reached 20 years of age. There was issues for funding for local area for our 17 to 19-year-olds and from 23 onwards. And from 20 onwards, healthcare, jobs and transport rated as the biggest issues that those young people were facing. Finally, we asked young people aged 18 and over their likelihood to vote. This is the data that we see here. We also asked young people if they thought their vote mattered. Just over 20%, so 1 in 5 young people are likely to vote, and just over a quarter of young people think that their vote doesn't matter. There is around a 12 percentage point difference in the likelihood of young women voting at 67%, indicating that they're likely or very likely to vote. The neutral stats on that answer remained equal. And again, we see that 12 percentage point difference in males who were more like 12 percentage points more likely to not vote in the elections. When we look at race and ethnicity, some of the most important points are that 41% of Black respondents were unlikely or very unlikely to vote compared to their white and Asian peers who were half as likely to respond this way. 67% of white respondents were likely or very likely to vote compared to 53% of our Asian respondents and 33% of our Black respondents, and only 19% of those from a mixed or multiple ethnic group were likely to vote too. A third of 18 to 21-year-olds were unlikely or very unlikely to vote. From 21 onwards, over half of young people are likely to vote, and from 23 onwards, 4 in 5 young people were likely to vote. We're going to move now to open up the discussion with Dr. Rupal Patel, Dr. Fiona Aldridge, and Sharon Wheatman.
Thanks, Lauren. There's lots and lots of interesting findings that have come out from the census, but also super concerning, particularly when we're looking at voting patterns and also how much young people think that their vote matters. And this is really crucial during the period that we've now entered in terms of campaigning periods. So, of course, we've heard lots of issues across the country, and there's lots of overlaps between local concerns and issues too, but they do slightly vary. Whilst in terms of looking at the issues from a country lens, there's a lot of focus on the economy and discrimination. And when we delve into local concerns with young people, there's lots coming through in terms of safety, but also crime and violence. So I wanted to pick up on our first question in terms of the local elections took place in May this year. How important do you both think local understanding is to tackle some of these issues that our young people have highlighted? And what can combined authorities do to tackle some of these concerns raised by young people? But also, importantly, where does that responsibility lie as we enter this period of general elections? Sharon, should we start with you first?
Brilliant. Thanks, Rupal. So for me, I think it's really important to reflect that local issues are different in different places, and they therefore need a different response. And we can see that just from some of the initial findings of the census. While there are common themes, there are different areas that young people want us to actually focus on. So it's really important that, you know, people who work in a place and are kind of talking to young people and the other stakeholders involved are part of shaping kind of the response to that. In terms of what combined authorities can do, I think we have a really key role as strategic conveners in the place where we work. So we have connectivity across our local authorities, our businesses, our providers, and our young people. And I think we have the opportunity to use our kind of powers and increased accountability that we've got through our devolution agreements to really look at what more can we do, how can we shape this around our place, and how can we create those conditions for every part of our local system to be more effective in our response.
Thanks, Sharon. Come over to you, Fiona.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree with Sharon that local understanding plays a really important part, and that is true at a combined authority level. But I think we would find, and I'm sure your survey reinforces, that even though some of these national issues are especially stark in some parts of the country, they're even more so when you get into smaller areas, those more disadvantaged areas, and as your figures show, when we think about particular groups of young people. So it's really vital that we understand what young people in certain places and of certain characteristics, what their experience is, what their challenges are, and what their hopes and aspirations are too. So that understanding is really important. But I would say even more importantly is then the ability to respond to that, because actually if young people have told us things that we then don't respond to, perhaps because we don't have levers locally, or perhaps we haven't listened enough, then actually you can see them getting more frustrated, and we might see an even greater rise in those young people who think their vote doesn't matter. And so our ability to come together and really reflect on those findings and say, what does it mean for our area and what are we going to do about it, is going to be really critical.
Of course, yeah. And in our census last year, there was a lot of that coming through in terms of disengagement. So it's super important to ensure that policy, but any change in this area, that young people feel that they are being heard and that they have got a say in these matters. You know, our young people are our future. They're the next generation. So having those policies in place is equally super important. So that leads me really nicely onto my second question. And as Lauren introduced, a real big part of our work here at Youth Employment UK is Youth Voice. And our Youth Voice Census is a big part of that. We believe it's super vital to gain the voices of young people to inform any policy change. What approach to listening to young people have you taken in your combined authorities, and how valuable has this been for decision making, and how important will it be in the coming months as we enter change? Fiona, shall I come to you first?
Yeah,
for that one?
yes, I go first too. So as a West Midlands Combined Authority, it is incredibly important that we hear and respond to the voices of young people to inform policy change. We're strong advocates of devolution, so that decisions should be made by understanding and responding to local challenge. And actually, if that is going to really work and get the benefits, the full benefits of it, then we need to make sure that we're understanding how things really are on the ground and not just assuming. So those voices are really important. Some of the ways in which we do it, so we have a young combined authority which has young people on it. We have a street team that sends out other young people out onto the streets of our towns and our cities to hear from young people, but also to talk to young people about the opportunities that are available. And of course, when we fund provision, so in the directorate that I work in, we fund skills training, then we're often going out to those places, to colleges, to training providers, to understand more about the experiences of young people. So is the training hitting the spot? What works? What else do they need? How do they hear about it? How do we reach more young people? And that's really important to shaping our provision. But I would say that we know we can do better and we have to do more. It's incredibly important, and we've got to find other ways of hearing from more young people. And that's why we wanted to support the survey, because we want to hear what young people are telling us through your work, so that we can shape our offer to them even more than we are doing now.
Yeah, no, I'll come straight over to you, Sharon.
Brilliant. Yes, and I would absolutely echo Fiona's point of we can always do more, and we're always trying to do more. And we were in exactly the same space in terms of wanting to really understand our local feedback from the youth census this year, so we can see how it's different, but also if there are any different messages to what we hear through our existing models. So for us in Greater Manchester, we've adopted the Lundy model of participation with young people across our organisation, and that's very much about creating a safe space for young people to share their views, being really clear on the kind of purpose. So, you know, it's not just it's a lovely chat, it doesn't go anywhere. You know, what are we seeking to find out about, and what will we do with it? And then I think most importantly, having a really clear plan for what do we do with that? Where do we take it? What are we going to, you know, what will your voice influence, and a real commitment to come back and share the kind of what we did, what was next. So it's not kind of, oh, we fed back and I don't know what happened to it. So a couple of kind of tangible examples of work we've done. So similar to Fiona in terms of commissioning, we always want to have young people with lived experience feeding into kind of the design of programs. And when we commissioned our last big funded GM-wide NEET support program, we established the final stage of that procurement as being a panel of young people who interviewed the final shortlisted providers. It was my best day in work ever. They absolutely grilled our providers, but we'd set up the scoring model in a way that even if we'd gone through our process and picked kind of our highest scorer, if they were the lowest scorer from the young people's panel, then they wouldn't be, they wouldn't have been commissioned. So they had a real strong and tangible voice within that decision-making process. And we also have a Youth Combined Authority, and they've recently been working with us to shape our Greater Manchester Baccalaureates. So they have conducted a wider survey across their networks of young people. They've kind of shared their thoughts and have produced a report that they will be presenting directly to the Mayor in a couple of weeks, which outlines what they think that should look like and why it's important to them. And I think for us, we do take this really seriously, and I think the real importance for us is we aren't making any assumptions about young people's experience within the system. We are using their actual live experience right now, which has been really useful for some of the things that we've said. We think it's like this, but you know, I went through the system 20, 30 years ago, it might be different. We've got real tangible evidence of this is what it's like now, this is what still doesn't work, this is what we said, the change that we want to see, which is ensuring we can shape our services around what is important now for our young people.
Yeah, super important work that you're both doing. And also just to pick up on the point in terms of lived experiences and groups of young people, we are also aware in terms of our Youth Voice Census, there'll be certain groups of young people who find it super challenging to access the census, and we are working very closely with, you know, both of you and your teams in organising Youth Voice sessions in your regions to give opportunities to those harder to reach, or those groups of people who wouldn't get a platform to voice their opinions. And it's a real important part of the work that we do, and hopefully our wider findings from the census will also be really important to guiding some of your work and your decision making in the coming months. So in terms of my third question, the census findings shows that there's big concerns young people are worried about, such as crime and safety. What impact do you think these concerns are having on confidence and well-being? And do you think that these could be holding people back from accessing work? Sharon, do you want to kick us off with that one?
I will do. So yeah, we can see really strongly in the census feedback that crime and violence are really important, and safety for our young people. We also have a local Be Well survey, which we put out across young people in Greater Manchester. And last year in the survey, 83% of our young people said that they had hope and optimism for the future, which is brilliant, but it does mean 17% of those young people don't. And that's a really key aspect of the work that we're trying to do in raising aspiration and creating new and kind of more bespoke pathways, I think, because even within that 17%, we know that inequalities persist within who feels most confident and who has that hope and who doesn't. I think the impact for young people is really tangible. So I think it's around their confidence, also around their kind of mental health and their resilience and ability to kind of progress into that career that they might be looking for. And I think there are aspects around feeling safe to travel. So, you know, if I want to go for that apprenticeship or go to that course or look at that job, what would my hours of work be? You know, can I try? You know, what would the transport route be? But also, you know, if you've experienced kind of crime or violence, it can really, you know, damage your kind of your feeling of well-being and your confidence to go out and kind of assert yourself and get to the space that you want to be. And equally, if you've been kind of, you know, involved in the youth justice system and, you know, have actually, you know, been involved in crime yourself, that can have kind of onward impacts in terms of, well, what does your CV look like, and, you know, what can you share, and will you feel discriminated against in terms of applying for things and taking them forward. So I think it's really important for us that we support all of our young people to try and overcome those barriers and build that resilience. And we have a very specific commitment this year that we're working with our violence reduction unit to create some bespoke referral pathways for young people coming through those systems to enable them to build that confidence, build that resilience, and connect with employers and providers to really help them see themselves in the space that other young people do as well.
Yeah. Fiona?
Yeah, thank you. It's really concerning, isn't it, the number of young people who are concerned about their own safety. I mean, it's not what we'd want for any of our young people. And in West Midlands and in Greater Manchester, we're very young areas. We want people to feel, we want those areas to thrive. We want those young people to feel safe. And if we're thinking about helping young people get into work, immediately people think about training and work experience and employment opportunities, and they are really, really important. But as Sharon said, I think actually as we delve deeper into those issues, we realise there's no silver bullet, there's no quick fix. There's some really complex issues, and we need to make sure that people have got, you know, safe housing, that they feel secure and safe at home and free from crime, that they've got affordable and accessible transport. It becomes a much bigger issue just than whether the young person has got skills for a job. And actually it's great that the survey, that the census really shows these. And I think for us, that's the potential of place-based policy making. So we don't just get to think about skills, we don't just get to think about employers, but we get to think about transport and safety and mental health support, and get to put those together and say, if we want our places to thrive and if we want our young people to thrive, then what are all the things we need to do to give them the best start in their working lives? And that's what we all want to do, but it is really complex, and making sure that we can put all those levers together is really, really important. And certainly in the West Midlands, in Greater Manchester and across the country, then this issue about crime and safety is really paramount, and it's something that as a country, nationally and locally, we absolutely need to address. And I think the great examples that Sharon's talked about, some of the provision that we've got in the West Midlands, is all really important that we get that in place, and we get that in place for all of our young people, because they won't thrive unless they do feel safe, and that has to be a priority for us all.
Great. And this really sums it up nicely in terms of, you know, our census has revealed that this is really complex. There's a wide range of issues. As Lauren started off, we gave, you know, young people an option of 10 different concerns, and across the spectrum, that, you know, there was concerns across all of the options that were in the census. And this really draws down to how complicated this is in terms of dealing with when we're looking at particular employment or work opportunities, how complex this is. And it comes back to that local understanding and having different support services and different support systems working together, working collaboratively together to support our young people, to ensure that they have got those opportunities. I just want to thank you both for joining us today on our session. I'm going to move on to talking a bit about current context now, and that's been really useful to do a bit of a deep dive into our census findings and really listening to the concerns that young people have raised through our census. And I thought it'd be useful to give an overview in terms of the current election period. And it just feels almost a lifetime ago since our Prime Minister Rishi was standing in the rain announcing that a general election will take place on the 4th of July. And since that day, you know, we have seen many televised debates, interviews with, you know, many leaders, media releases, and also news articles. And of course, we had a really busy week last week in terms of manifesto releases. There's been a few big issues that have dominated the news, in particular televised debates over the last couple of weeks. And these have predominantly been on tax, migration, and healthcare. And what our census, or our early findings from our census, is showing is that big concerns and issues for our young people are much wider than that. And of course, they do include the economy and healthcare, but also include crime, safety, and also jobs. So it's super important that parties break down that information in these areas from the manifestos and make this information accessible to our young people so they can make informed decisions, but also feel engaged during this election period and also feel that their vote will matter. Here at Youth Employment UK, we think it's crucial that young people are making informed decisions and also have the information available. So we do have an article up on our website that signposts young people to resources that gives them information on registering to vote, tools where young people can find out the candidate that's running in their area, and also where to go to get more information on manifestos. With 1 in 5 young people worried about jobs and funding, it's crucial that parties also ensure that their pledges concerning FE, skills and employment are also communicated with young people. So I finally wanted to end in giving a summary of some of the announcements and some of the pledges that have been made in 2 of the main parties, so Labour and Conservative. This will be a brief, impartial summary of what's been announced. And of course, the manifestos do go into greater detail of other pledges that the parties have made. So apprenticeships feature in both Labour and Conservative, but I'll start with listing out some of the main policy announcements for Labour. So their first is what they've called the Growth and the Skills Levy. And this is adapting the apprenticeship levy. So this will give businesses more flexibility in how they use their levy. So they will be able to use 50% of their levy for other training, and this could include pre-apprenticeship training, but also courses to prepare people for apprenticeships and jobs. They have also announced a youth guarantee, which will mean opportunities for training and apprenticeship or help to find work for all young people aged 18 to 21 years. And this is to prevent young people from becoming excluded from the world of work and also the risk of becoming NEET. They've also guaranteed a 2 weeks work experience for every young person and improved careers service. And their improved careers service, they have suggested to bring Job Centre Plus and the National Careers Service together to provide a national jobs and career service platform for young people. They've also announced Skills England, which will help deliver Labour's industrial strategy, who were formerly working with the Migration Advisory Committee, and they would consult on the growth and the skills levy too. And Labour have also announced a post-16 skills strategy to better integrate further and higher education to ensure high quality teaching. So if we move on to some of the announcements for Conservatives, they have focused on similar areas, but have taken a slightly different take on it. So the Conservatives have pledged to retain the apprenticeship levy, but in terms of increasing the number of apprenticeships, they have suggested 100,000 more apprenticeships will be available every year by 2029. And they have proposed that they will do this by closing university courses or university degrees that have the worst outcomes, so worse employment opportunities. And they have also announced that they will commission a review in terms of how they would approach that policy announcement too. Of course, this has been ongoing for some time in terms of introducing the Advanced British Standard. This role will take around a decade and includes replacing T-levels and A-levels, with the aim of having students study maths and English in some form up until 18. And the plan here is to bring together academic and vocational courses together as one. They've also announced a national service for 18-year-olds. So all 18-year-olds will have be able to take part in a years of national service. And this includes a year either in the armed forces or a year of volunteering for 1 weekend a month or 25 days a year. And they've also announced that they will run an inquiry into how this could be implemented and how this would work. In terms of other announcements, they have also announced a flexi job apprenticeship scheme, and this will be a flexible coordination service for apprenticeships for film, TV, gaming, and music sectors. So typically those sectors that have lower take-up currently. And lastly, they've also announced that they will continue in terms of higher education, their lifelong loan entitlement for levels 4 to 6. So it's interesting to see the different take in terms of Labour manifesto focuses on integrating further education and higher education to ensure higher quality teaching, whereas Conservatives, their approach has been more focused on separating the two out in terms of closing those university degrees with worse outcomes to increase the number of apprenticeships. So they've taken their approaches slightly differently. Great. So just want to thank everyone today for joining, and also thank our two guests, Dr. Fiona Aldrich and Sharon Wheatman, for joining our session today.